Welcome to the MEND, a podcast to learn about services and support for victims and survivors of crime, sponsored through the Center for Crime Victim Services here in the state of Vermont. I'm Anna Nassett, and I am your host of this bi-monthly podcast and show. Today on the show, we have Hali Picciano, veteran, activist, speaker, and survivor from Texas. The show was created to take a deeper look at services, organizations, and concept for victims and survivors of crime. We want to acknowledge the healing process and provide resources not only in our state of Vermont, but throughout the country that could benefit victims and survivors as they begin to mend. I want to begin, as always, with a trigger warning. Our goal is to create a safe place to discuss topics of healing, but with that in mind, we may occasionally hear a story related to crime, sexual assault, discuss our mental health, or other sensitive subject matter. We urge you to care for yourself and listen at your own discretion. So today, as I said, we have Hali. Hali is a retired major of the Army. She was born in California and enlisted in the Army in 2001, attending basic training at Fort Jackson in South Carolina. She joined the military as a dental technician and served in various duties and locations from Walter Reed Medical Center, 30th Medical Brigade, Aberdeen Providing Grounds, and her last enlisted assignment was at the Center for Health Promotion and Preventative Medicine, all while earning her bachelor's degree at the University of Maryland College. Hali is an active advocate for victims of sexual and domestic violence. She appeared for special congressional panel for assault victims, participated in an educational training program for initial entry soldiers, and was an advocate for the King County Sexual Assault Resource Center, and continues to advocate through congressional venues for resource programs to expand for sexual assault victims. She currently sits on a board member of Hush No More, an organization that offers victims platforms to heal and continue to support training for the hush topics. Following her retirement in 2021, she continues to remain active as an advocate for all victims of sexual assault and domestic violence within the military walls and otherwise. She resides in Texas with her 2 children and is also part owner of an ice cream shop, which is very cool in my mind. So thank you so much for being here, Hali. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I, admire so much the work that you do and, just creating a very open place for people to come and get resources, talk about the subjects, hear from other people who've been through this is just really great and so admirable. So thank you for your work.
Well, right back at you, my friend. Full disclosure, Hali and I are both members of the Difference Makers 10 Strong, which is a speakers team. And so there's a group of us from all over the country that come together to talk about these topics and train together. So it's great to get to work with you on this today.
Yeah.
So to begin with, as you are a survivor, can you share a little bit about your story and how you got into this work? Really just whatever you're comfortable with to give context to our listeners.
Yeah. So I'm a military sexual trauma survivor. That's kind of a new term, right? We didn't have that 15, 20 years ago, but my real whole, I guess, journey starting down this activism trail started with a domestic violence sexual assault. I was in a relationship with my abuser for a while before the abuse started. And I think that is just so stinking important for people to understand, because so many people out there that I speak with, and I'm sure you encounter this too, they feel like, oh, you dated on Friday, he raped you on Friday, and then you just stayed with him, right? And that's not the case. And so for me, my abuse was very foundationally groomed, right? So I dated my abuser for a while, ended up pregnant with a child, and kind of, with him, and not really a way to get away from him, right? Because once you have a child, you're together forever. So after my daughter was born, things were like pretty bad still, right? He was more sexually abusive, more physically abusive, more verbally and mentally abusive. I ended up pregnant for a second time. And I think it's really hard for people to believe that you can be in a relationship and be raped and have children, right? Because people think like, oh, well, you're in this relationship, so you must want it. You must want to be with this. And what I tell people and share with people is that my abuse was so slow. Like it literally changed the being of who I am, right? It started out this wonderful relationship with this wonderful guy that wanted to go dancing and, get dressed up and just go. And he would say, look at my beautiful girlfriend. And then it turned into, oh, your laugh is so annoying. I wish you would stop. Like you are so lucky I put up with it. Nobody would ever want to be with you. To oh my gosh, are you wearing that? You need to, no, I'm never going to stay with you if you keep doing those things. And then it turned physical, right? So emotionally, he had me on lockdown. Then it became physical when I was already like this shell of a person that was like, I'm not worthy. I am lucky he's with me. I am lucky I have someone. Like I should be grateful. And I really did turn into this person that was like, what am I doing? Like, why can't I make him happy? Like, I have to do more. And instead of me like continuing on to be this person that was like, I don't care, I'm going to live my life, I really became this person that like almost always was like, how can I make him happy? How can I be better? How can I be? And I did exactly what groomers in this situation do. And I transitioned into like this person that was trying to be somebody else for this other person. And that's what a lot of people, that don't understand. Like when you're a victim of sexual assault, domestic violence, and any kind of like emotional start, right? When the abuse is emotionally started, you become someone else and you don't realize what you've lost. Everybody else on the planet, hindsight's 2020, they're like, oh, you were being abused. And I'm like, but I didn't know that. One of the biggest questions I get asked all the time is like, why did you stay? And the problem with that is, I mean, it's, totally a victimizing question, but more importantly, it's like, I didn't know I was in an abusive relationship. I really did think something was wrong with me. So anyway, sorry, I digress for just a moment. Anyway, so
no, absolutely. That's a really important digression. People, they do ask that all the time of the, why did you stay? And it's like, that's not the question to be asking, because it's putting that blame on us.
Yeah.
Instead of putting it on where it needs to be.
It's your fault.
Yeah.
Right? Like those are the things. It's hard. So anyway, I had my second daughter, and during my pregnancy with my second daughter, things were physically horrible. I mean, we got into a very, very, very big physical altercation, which resulted in me being hospitalized. I almost lost my daughter. And due to really just time, right, of this, I'm leaving a whole bunch of my story out. But after that physical altercation, he was court-martialed in the military. And he was found not guilty for domestic violence, but was found guilty for 2 other charges, one of them being resisting arrest and one of them disrespecting an officer. And those 2 guilty charges, verdicts, ended up kind of getting him demoted and getting him, a little slap on the wrist. He got demoted from E7 Sergeant First Class to Staff Sergeant. He later violated a no contact order and, was demoted again, but like I mean, he was the epitome of a beautiful perpetrator, right? Everybody in our command team thought he was awesome. Everybody thought he was the go-to guy. When they heard these things, they're like, there's no way he could have done that. Like, absolutely not. Like, he's such an amazing soldier, an amazing person. Like, no way is this him. So they ended up, he went back to the board, he got promoted, the Army re-promoted him. And I had to live with that not guilty verdict for like 8 years, because people who don't understand the judicial process hear not guilty and think innocent, right? They hear not guilty and they're like, oh, she's a liar. And they don't realize that beyond a reasonable doubt is a very tough burden, right? Like,
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's hard. And so I had to live through that. I mean, I felt myself like going 5 or 6 or 7 times harder to go half or a quarter as far, because in the military, at least, the community is very small. It's a huge, large organization, but you just bump into people from all over the place, everywhere. And so I was always around people who knew him that would like whisper off to the side or, excuse me, immediately know that I was the liar that ruined his career. Well, my abuser, as I said, got a second chance. He did not take that second chance well. He raped another woman again later on in his life. And when she filed charges, they kind of looked at his history and they found me and added a couple of charges of rape against him to his second court martial. So at his second court martial, there were 11 total charges. 3 of them were rape, 2 against me, 1 against another victim, child endangerment, domestic violence, and some other, other charges that military specific. But he was eventually found guilty of all 3 rapes, and he is currently spending time at Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, which is a huge win, right? But I think, one of the biggest reasons I think I share my story is there are so many people out there that think they're going to get a guilty verdict and it's going to be heavenly and they love it and it's over and everything is great. And that's not the case. It's just different kind of trauma, right? It's different triggers. It's different stuff you're dealing with. I actually stole this from somebody in our Difference Makers 10 Strong group. I don't remember who said it. So whoever it was, I told them I was stealing this, but the journey to recovery is not linear. People think like, oh, It happened on Friday. You should be better on Monday. Like, what's the deal? And I tell everyone it's so circular. You can be going great for a couple of months and then you hear someone that reminds you of your abuser and you're like, oh my gosh, and you're back to step 3. And then you can be going and you see a car that, reminds me of you or reminds you of your abuser. And then you're like back at step 1. And I've been just a roller coaster, for 17 years.
You and me both, friend. Like we both have that positive outcome of the guilty verdict and of the offender serving time currently. But it doesn't mean that it's all sunshine and roses. And I even remember my advocate saying that to me on the day of sentencing. She's like, no matter what happens, like this is not going to be the healing place. Like there's a whole journey and it's going to take forever. And there's going to be the wins and the losses. And like you said, you're going along just fine. And then you just go, whoop.
And it's stuff you can't prepare for, right? No. It could be somebody behind you at the supermarket store where you're like, oh my gosh, like I have to go. I mean, I've left a full cart of groceries in a store before. I took the frozen stuff away and put the frozen stuff back, but I was like, I'm so sorry, I have to go. I can't be here. And it's crazy. I mean, there have been movies that I've watched and I'm like into them and then they introduce a character and I'm like, I can't watch this anymore.
Yep, absolutely.
People don't realize that, right? I'm 17 years removed from my first rape. And it's like, now it's like, oh my gosh, like, what the heck? Why does this car make me so crazy? Like, why am I crying in the middle of traffic because there's a certain car in front of me? So anyway, so that's kind of my story in a nutshell. I know that we'll kind of get into some other things in a little bit, but that's just really my story in a nutshell. And I think it's important really to share with people, anybody that hears me, because the military gets a lot of flack right now, right? The SHARP program is just under so much scrutiny and people are like, oh, it's broken and it needs to be fixed. And it's this horrible situation, whatever. And while I agree, there's a lot of work to be done. And there's a lot of there's a long way till we get to that, that finish line. I am the only I'm the only person in any military branch of service. So Army, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, or Coast Guard, any of them that has been through the court-martial process twice with the same abuser. Once with a not guilty verdict, later on with a guilty verdict, once without a special victims counsel, and then later with a special victims counsel, once as an enlisted soldier, once as an officer, but once, and this is, I think, the most important part, once before Congress said this behavior is no longer acceptable and you are going to change things military, and once after. So I'm the only person in any military branch of service that can say, yes, we have a long way to go to get to that finish line, but we are so far away from the start line, right? We are so far away from that. And that is really the most important thing I think I can share with anybody is like, we have a lot of work to do, but we've done so much work already, right?
And that's incredible because I was like, one of my questions was, how did the military respond? And so you're just kind of sharing that, but it's, I think it's also important for us to realize like, one, the domestic violence sexual assault movement is still so young. It started in the 70s, right?
Right.
And so to see that in that short time period, how the military switched from, before the Congress and then after, like that shows like concrete steps of progress. And that's really cool. And I'm glad that you got to experience the flip side of it as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's hard because, I talk to a lot of victims. Lots of victims call me and talk to me, get a hold of me through whatever avenue they can. And they'll say like, oh, my perpetrator only got administratively discharged. And I have to kind of sit them down and say, like, what is justice to you? Right. Like,
Bingo.
Because that's horrible, right? The only answer for anybody is death, right?
Yeah.
Death. Forever. I want him dead, needle in the arm. But the problem is that that's never going to be the result of a sexual assault or a domestic violence. And while we want it to be, that's not ever going to be, right? The answer is never going to be, oh, yeah, they sexually assaulted somebody, and even though the victim has a life sentence, they're going to get a life sentence. That's just not the case.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to understand that a positive outcome in almost any sense is a positive outcome, right?
Yes.
And that's the hardest thing for victims, because they're like, well, my abuser only got 2 months in prison. Well, but are they a registered sex offender? Are they, what else happened? What are the results of that? And that's the hardest thing, because even though my abuser got 25 years, he's at 8 right now. But like, I just got a letter from the from the prison, like about a month and a half to 2 months ago, saying that he's, getting ready to be up for annual clemency to determine whether or not he'll be let out early. And I get to go through this every single year. It was a mess for me. I was a mess. I was like reading this paperwork, crying like a baby, because I was just like, I've only had 8 years. And so now, we've gotten to okay, it's been 2 years, it's been 3 years, it's been 8 years, to now it's like, oh my gosh, there's only 12 years left, only 11 years left. So we're going downhill now. So it's a different like aspect, but I'm going to just say, I'm sorry, I don't even remember what started us on this answer. So I'm
loving it. I'm loving it. I'm loving it because you and I have a lot of similarities within this, and just that, like, yeah, like our sentence is, we're counting down the days too. And I'm sure people ask you about that all the time. And just that whole concept of that we have to find justice for ourselves. Like, that's a justice is not necessarily the guilty verdict, because there will never actually be justice for what was done to us. Like, and so we find that in different ways. And I could kind of go like, do you feel like, because someone just asked me this the other day, and they asked me if by speaking and sharing my story felt like another form of justice to me. And I was like, ooh, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, that is interesting. I would say no. I think my answer to that, without having given it much thought, my immediate answer is no. And I say that, I think, because, right, my justice is that my girls become productive members of society despite not having him in their lives, right? Like, my justice is being successful in life. And so I don't date. I've made that, conscious decision not to date. I tried and I got my heart broken, and I just was like, I can't do this. Like, it's too much. So
I hear you, my friend.
It's, I think the thing is like, the focus is my kids, right? That's what the focus is. And this is like a dumb justice, and I will never, ever give up on this justice. And people say it's a dream, not really justice, but I was actually talking to somebody about it the other day, and it was at a presentation, and I think that this is where it's not a dream, right? So I love the show Survivor. It's the best show on the planet. It is my favorite. Like, I absolutely love it. And I wanted to be on it a long time ago. Like, the first time I ever sent in an application, it was like VHS, 27-page, like handwritten, document. We didn't have the internet, none of that stuff.
Right.
So, but I had told my abuser about it, and he said, oh, you're a nut. Like, you're dumb. You would never do good on that show. You would be voted out first. You are just so stupid for thinking that that's the case. And when I decided to like take my life back, 5 or 6 years ago, when I just was overwhelmed by just so many things. I was like, you know what? I'm going to apply again. And then I became like a crazy applier, and I've like applied 21 times, 22 times, I think now. And so to me, justice is like getting on that show and being like, screw you. You thought I was a nut. I'm going to win. Right?
Love it. Yes.
And people tell me all the time, they're like, oh my gosh, that's such a weird like thing to want to do. But I tell everybody, like, if you know Jeff Probst, like hook him up with me, because the two of us, need to be friends, because he needs to have me on the show. But it's because people that are victims in any kind of situation often lose hope.
Yeah.
They don't think that they're worthy of things. They don't think they're worthy of being happy. They don't think that they're worthy of like the simple things in life. And everybody makes fun of me for applying, because I might be the first voted out. I am a very cranky, like no coffee, no food, no water kind of person.
Okay.
but it's the thought of like having a dream and not giving up on it, right? It's the thought of like, you took so much away from me. You're not going to take this silly dream too,
Absolutely. I love that. I absolutely love that. And I think like, I mean, that speaks to, just our healing process, and just like, what kind of was that? And I love that, like, we call ourselves survivors. So I love the idea of you being like the ultimate survivor.
That'd be so great. One day, maybe.
I if I know anybody that knows Jeff Probst, I'll let you know. I can't think of anybody, but
it's funny, I think, because everybody jokes. I tell everybody like, hey, listen, you want to come mow my grass or hook me up with like a phone call from Jeff Probst? Either of those two things will help me out, right? So I know it's silly, but it really is just having the hope.
Yeah.
Because hope is lost when you're in a depressed state, right? Going through depression, like I tell people sometimes I would look up and literally see not a tiny speck of light. It was total darkness. And there was a time in my life where like, I literally was just trying to get through the next hour. Like, please just let me get through the next hour. And I'll take the hour after that after. Like, I'm only thinking about the next 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Like, hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, like, I mean, this is something I share when I have my really dark days, which I still do. My big thing is I'm like, if you can just do the dishes today, that's enough.
Yeah.
Like, that's enough. Because for me, there's something really mental about like the cleaning. It's like, okay, you're just like, you're putting your hands in water. You're at least getting the dishes done. That's the one thing that you are accomplishing today. And if you did that, then hey, you're good. You can go back and watch Gilmore Girls and lay under a stack of quilts.
Yeah. I think people don't understand. Like, there are a lot of people out there, because I think this is the struggle for me, at least. And this is just my thoughts on it, is sexual assault and domestic violence is like one of those topics of taboo. We don't talk about it, right? There's a card at Walgreens that's like, oh, sorry for your loss. There's a card that says, congratulations on your new baby. But there's not a card that says like, sorry, you've been sexually assaulted. And people sometimes, like, when they find out, they're like, I don't know how to handle this. Like, I don't know what to do. And when they found out initially, that was the response. And so when they don't know what to do, they don't talk to you, which further ostracizes you, which further puts you in like this depressed state, right? So it's a very lonely journey to recover, because so many people, we don't talk about these things. We don't normalize them. And I think, like, one of the things I like broke down probably about a year-ish ago with my mom. I was on the phone with her and I said, I didn't realize that my credit card debt was because I was depressed. I didn't realize that like my credit card debt was because I didn't want to make dinner for the girls. So I just bought Outback.
Yep.
I didn't want to, come home and clean anything. So I just paid a maid service. I didn't want to do laundry. So I just went and bought clothes. Like, people don't understand like the connection of that. And when I realized that, I mean, it was like 10 or 12 years after my assault, I was like, oh, I have to get out of credit card debt. Like, I have so much credit card debt, but it was because I was just in such a bad place where I just didn't want to do anything. And you're right. Like, putting this cup of coffee in the sink is all I can do today. And that's what I'm going to do.
And you celebrate
very,
it.
very simple. Yeah.
You're like,
and I'm like, woo!
Look at me. I put that cup in the sink. Yes. I hear you. Yeah. How has, like, as you've shifted into this more public place with speaking and connecting with other survivors, and now that you've retired as well, how has that helped you with your healing process? Or just what has that been like for you to navigate this kind of more like public role of speaking out?
I think for me, it has certainly healed me and helped me heal, recognizing that other people are seeing that they can be strong too. Right. To me, it's not about, going and speaking and talking to people and sharing my story about my life with them. To me, it's about going and talking and sharing and showing people that you can be any rank in the military and go to behavioral health. It's okay.
Yep.
You can be in any situation. You can be in a great home life. You can be in a crappy home life. You can be in a single home life. Like, you can be in any of these things and go to behavioral health, or go talk to the chaplain, or go seek assistance. I had a lot of people while I was still active duty who would come to me and say, like, how do you do it as a major? I'm like, how do you do it as a private? Like, why are we any different? Right? Like,
yeah,
everybody deserves to be happy. Everybody deserves to heal. Everybody deserves to be okay. And I think, again, it gets back to that normalizing it, right? Like, everybody, it's okay. My dad is diabetic. I've been sexually assaulted. Like, normalizing that so that people don't feel ashamed, right? Because for me, I didn't come forward for so long because I felt like it was my fault. I was like, oh my gosh, I did this. If I wasn't better, if I didn't do these things, then it wouldn't have happened. And so for me, it was realizing, like, I didn't rape myself.
right.
I didn't choke myself. I didn't sodomize myself. Like, I shouldn't be ashamed of these things. And so for me, sharing, there's always someone in the audience that comes up after and says, thank you so much. I think I'm going to get help. And even just the door opening is enough for me to say, okay, because, it's hard to talk about these intimate details about your life and talk about trauma and go into like these tailspins of like all of the, crappy things that you've done and money you've spent and, all of these things, because it's tough. But for the one person out there that hears your story and is like, I got help. I mean, I get so many messages on Facebook from people that are like, I got a message, I think about 3 weeks ago. She said, I heard your story about 3 years ago. I'm finally getting out of this situation. Thank you so much. And I was like, oh, I love you. Let's go to lunch and coffee, right? Like,
yes,
that's what makes advocacy work so amazing to me.
Yeah.
is other people feeling like the hard work I've done has proven that they can do it too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry, I got on the soapbox.
No, I love it. I 100% agree. I mean, for me, it's just like, this is in service to others. And same thing, like, when I started speaking, it was just about stalking, to educate people on stalking, because no one takes it seriously. That's my soapbox I'm not going to get on right now. But even within that, like, I wasn't telling all these other parts of my story, from like my young adult years, from childhood, my struggles with mental health. I was leaving all of that out because I still carried shame with it. And it's really been through, well, our friend Eric, who's one of the difference makers for our listeners. He's somebody who I really feel like, getting to know him and just feeling really encouraged. Like, I've opened up and been like, oh, I don't need to be ashamed of these things. I can talk about these. And in doing so, it's completely opened up that same thing where it's like, people are coming up to me and like, I see that I this was wrong, what was happened to me, and this was wrong. And I need to get help. And I'm like, no shame in therapy, people. Love me some therapy. So it's really interesting. And it just sounds like you and I are similar in our philosophies.
Well, I just, like I said, it's the topic and something we just don't talk about. The only way to do it is to have people. I mean, there are people that are, the bridge makers of every single topic. I mean, if you look across the board, every single topic that's out there, somebody exposed themselves to get that, right? We would not have transgender equality if there wasn't somebody that was willing to expose themselves and say, we deserve something, we deserve
Yeah.
to be treated appropriately. And because of that, now we have this very open mindset to so many different topics in the
Yeah.
world.
And I even think that like when Me Too started, when Me Too became famous, it started many years ago. Like I felt like that started to really open up the doors to have a more normalized conversation around these subjects where, I could be out with a friend and before we would never talk about these things in public. And now we're just like, oh yeah, and this work and this and this. And I mean, I think that's really important that we are normalizing this conversation so that we're not carrying all that shame and burden.
Yeah. Well, and I think, this is the thing that people don't recognize, right? It takes decades to change a culture of people. I'll use race inequality as an example. Not 100 years ago, we had slaves in the world. And so we now, decades later, are transitioning into a group of people that demands equality for all versus, we couldn't vote. Women couldn't vote.
Yeah.
It took decades to get to the table. We're still facing, pay issues and whatnot. And so it just takes time to change a culture. And so I think people that are like, oh, this is so broken. It is, but we are doing something good every day. And even if it's a small step forward, it's still a step forward. And I think that that's so important to remind people. I think, and I said this a little earlier, like we have so many people that are out there just really not happy with so many outcomes, but there are not very many people that are sharing positive outcomes because it's traumatizing.
Yeah.
Right. It's easy to go and say, I'm so angry. This should have been something different. And I'm mad about this, but because they are, and, rightfully so, they absolutely should feel justified in those feelings. But there are a lot of people that are out there that don't share their story because they have had, justice to some extent, whatever and however you define that. And they want to just be done with it and not have that be, because I think I tell people all the time, I don't want people to be like, Hali, she's the domestic violence survivor, right? I want them to be like, Hali is that crazy lady that makes amazing ice cream.
Yes.
Right? Like that's what I want.
Yeah.
I want them to be like, Hali's the mom of the, 2 cool kids or whatever. Like, I don't want to be the sexual assault survivor. Like, that's not who I am.
I'm Anna, like, who lives at the end of a dirt road with her 3-legged dog and makes macrame. Like, yeah, I'm also a stalking expert and survivor and sexual assault survivor, but it's more like, yeah, I'm the dirtbag next to you at the bonfire on a Saturday night. Like, that's more how I want to be identified.
Yes.
And, yeah. Wow, this has been so much fun. I could talk to you forever. So, well, just as a side question, like, sure. Do you find making ice cream to be like a really joyful, fun thing and helpful to healing or not?
It's funny. I have 2 master's degrees, like a master's in leadership studies and a master's in healthcare administration. So getting out of the military, people were just assuming I'd go back and work in healthcare. But it is the stress and the triggers of like unexpected people, unexpected patients. One of the last couple of, years in my military career, I had to deal with somebody, with a patient who was very upset with the care that they had received. They remind me of my abuser, and I was not okay for like a while. Like it was a couple of days before I was okay again. There's no stress in ice cream. The stress is like, oh my gosh, is there strawberry mix today? Like, oh my gosh, do I have fresh strawberries or, not? And I think for me, it's the creativity of being able to be adventurous, right? Yeah. And not know, and just be creative. I work with both of my kids. So it's one-on-one time with both of them that, gets us talking, just the creativity of it. I love
important. Like, that's like what, like I said, like my little macrame side hustle. Like I love it. Like I'm doing some craft fairs this summer and I'm just like, it's the creativity. It helps my mind. I enjoy it. And yeah, it's so important to have those
there's
things.
There's actually like journals that have been released that it's actually like proven that like doing mosaic work or painting or any of those like intricate details where your mind has to kind of stop and think like, what do I need? What do I, do, whatever. That's very relaxing for people with PTSD.
Yeah.
And although I'm not technically cooking anything, right, but following a recipe in the kitchen, making the ice cream is really just, it's very nice, right? It's very wonderful to be able to take a minute, hang out with my kids. There's no stress. There's a little stress because you have to get the ice cream out fast. So sometimes like towards the end, I'm like, hurry up.
That's okay.
For the most part, no stress.
I love it. I love it. So I was going to ask, as we start to, we're winding down now. What would you suggest to victims and survivors listening today as they make decisions to report or not report, look at options? Like, what would you suggest to those listening today that have not filed actual reports and are just looking to decide things?
I think that is such an intimately personal decision, right? It is so important to kind of sit down and, I think you said it earlier, you have to manage expectations of like what could happen. Because what should happen and what could happen are drastically different. And I think that, people go into some of these situations with the expectation of like, they're going to go to prison forever and I'm going to be free. And I think that's not the case, right? So when you have a situation where you're deciding whether you should report or you should, not report, I think it's so important to kind of emotionally look at like, what can I handle? Right? Like, where am I in this process and in this journey process? And what can I do if it's a negative outcome, if it doesn't go, if it this, the attorneys in my case, as hard and frustrating as it was for me, they managed my expectations the entire time. And they weren't my attorneys, right? I had a special victims counsel assigned to me, which is a beautiful program that the military has that assigns an attorney to the victim that gets to go, in with the judges in the judges' chambers and all that. And so there's someone there actually representing the victim, not just the prosecutor and the defense. And so I was very blessed in I was one of the first cases to go to court with a special victims counsel. But, at the beginning, as soon as they preferred charges, I was like, I want to write my victim impact statement right now. And they were like, no,
hold up.
Time. Yeah. Whoa. We were like a way long time away from that. And then, then there was some delays. And then we finally ended up going to another pre-court hearing. And I was like, we successfully, completed that one. And so I was like, okay, I want to write my victim impact statement now. And he was like, nope, it's not time.
Nope.
And we get to court and we're there. And I'm sitting in this room and I don't have any really thing to do except look up like, do. And I was like, I want to write my statement now. He's like, absolutely not. It's not time. And it wasn't until the judge came out and said guilty that he said, okay, now write it.
Yeah.
And it was emotional because it wasn't just it wasn't a unemotional victim statement. It was like, now all of these emotions have come, to fruition. And I think that was so important for me. Because I think another thing people don't understand, because we have this preconceived like SVU thing, right? Law and order, the crime happens. It's all
an hour later, it's all solved.
Yeah. They're in jail. 42 minutes later, justice is served and the CEO gets to win the lottery, right? Like, that's not the case. I mean, in my case, charges were preferred in November of 12, and we did not see the inside of a courtroom until January of 14. It took a long time. And so, I don't want to be negative because I want people to come forward and get the help that they need. But I really feel like if you're not prepared, then, whatever the outcome is could be devastating to you,
Yeah.
Like I said,
you're going to wait. Right. I mean, a lot of times, my trial was 2 years, nearly 2 years from filing to going to trial. And that was like, you took the words out of my mouth. It was like, it's not SVU here. Like, it takes a long time. And the whole time I felt like I was being prepared we might not get guilty. And you're like, why am I going through this? But I'm glad
it's hard, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't understand that because you're like, well, no, I've done this. I've said this, and this is the other thing, like people don't understand. And I try to tell everyone this because lots of people will say like, oh, well, this person said that it happened and then said it didn't. And I tell people, look, you can never take that from somebody because somebody withdrawing a complaint is not a false allegation. And this is what I tell people. Like, I had to talk to CID, and CID are the people that need to know the details based solely on like, we have to figure out like where to collect the evidence, right? And then you have to go talk to the doctor, and the doctor has to know this perspective of like evidence collection, right? And then you have to go talk to the commander, and then the commander has to know these, or the lawyers or whomever has to know because they need to know what charges to prefer. And so in my case, I told my story to like 16 different people, right? Everybody needed a different perspective. And so sometimes when you're not prepared for that, you get to like the third story and you're like, I can't handle this. Like,
I can't tell it again. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm done. Right. And so that's one of the most amazing things that some military bases have started doing. I know Fort Hood, they videotape the discussion. And then everybody has access to it that needs it. And then if they have other questions, they're able to get those out. But that's a huge change from like pre-Congress and post-Congress, because now people are looking at like victims and like, how do we not re-victimize people? But I think it's just, you have to be prepared and you have to know. And if you know someone that's been through the process, talk with them. Because I think one of the worst things you can do is be like, I'm going to go report this and it's going to be over next week and I'm going to be able to get on with my life, because that's just not the case. And so I think for me, my piece of advice is just be prepared, have somebody set up from a mental health perspective, or somebody that you trust wholeheartedly that you can talk to about the process, because it's not easy.
Yeah.
There's a limited series on Netflix. It's called Unbelievable. I don't know if you've watched it, but it was so impactful to me. Like watching that first episode, I think it took me like 10 times, because every single time we'd get to a certain point, I'm like, I feel like this victim. I feel this person all over again. Like I feel depleted, because back in the day, people were like, well, were you drinking? Did you say no? Did you? And so, you're like, you've got this light on you, or you feel like they're interrogating you and you're like, no, I didn't. I don't remember. And you're like, oh my gosh, like, because I think that's the other thing. Like we work so hard to like tuck these horrible like details into like the spaces of our lives that we don't think about, that we're like, what? I mean, I was giving a presentation about 2, maybe 3 months ago. And in the middle of the presentation, I remembered something and I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot all about that. And it was something so silly, but it was just, oh my gosh, you know what I mean? So you can't prepare for it. And so
I did that last week. I did that last week in front of a lot of people and was like, oh. And I actually got like a little choked up. I was like, sorry, not sure where that came from, but it happens. And luckily, like we're talking to people who get it and they care. And there's something so beautiful about that like now in that moment, if that happens, like there's 100 advocates in law enforcement watching me speak. Like I'm okay. And that to me feels really, really like well cared for.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely beautiful, like way to like answer that question. I think it's nail on the head, right? Like absolutely. But that's my advice. Be prepared. And it's be prepared, because you can't go in thinking it's going to be guilty. And, I talked to somebody last week and I told him, because he's like, oh yeah, I have a person who's getting ready to go through this process. And I told her, we're going to get him. And I'm like, that's the worst thing you can say. Yeah. Don't ever say that, because you don't
promise anything.
Yeah. You don't know that. And now you've ruined potentially, it's not ruined the life of, but it's ruined the faith of the system.
Yep.
Right. Because you said we were going to get him and we didn't. And maybe they will, I don't know. But if they don't, it's the system that has failed, right? Which is why we have so many people that are like, oh, the system is broken. Yeah. I'm sorry. I got off my soapbox. Again, I'm like, I keep getting on the soapbox. I swear I'm on the floor.
I love it. You and I have very, very similar philosophies. So I'm so excited to like, I try and keep a lot of Well, I know I always express opinions on here, but I try and, just kind of let whoever my guest is just really roll out. And I'm like, oh, yes, Holly. Yes, yes, yes. I am with you.
I love it.
And I could talk to you all day, but for the sake of time, I am going to start to wind down.
Okay.
I do always just love to end with a positive message, just like a short statement that you would have to listeners out there, to kind of close out our heavy subject matter. So just something positive that you can think of that you'd like to share with folks that are listening today.
I think that the positive thing I'll end this with is just sexual assault. People who have been through sexual assault or domestic violence are normal people. They can survive. It is a journey to survivorship, right? It's not, you're not a victim and you're always a victim.
Yep.
You are the one that takes you on the journey to survivorship. And in my case, sometimes I'm still a victim. I am a survivor, and then I'm like, whoop, I'm a victim again, and I'm going to become back on that road. So it is a journey. It is not, a project. There is no end date, and you will be on this journey forever, but you have the ability to be, a survivor and remain a survivor. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of talking. It's, an experience, but you can survive it. You can do it. And I have faith in you.
Yeah. And you're not alone. We're right here with you.
Yeah.
We're right here with you as survivors and victims. And yeah, I'm not going to go on my little tangent, but for a moment, like people often, like if I refer to myself as a victim, they're like, no, you're a survivor. I'm like, I get to decide what I am that day.
Yeah.
And you do. So that journey is yours.
Absolutely. Yes,
the journey is yours, but you are not alone.
Yeah, it is you. You define it. Absolutely. Yes. I love that.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. I'm so excited to share this with folks. If you want to learn more about Hali, you can check out dm10strong.com. And I'm guessing that there'll be more about Hali coming out as she moves further into her retirement. And just so excited to have you here. Hopefully I can come to Texas and eat some ice cream with you. I would really like that.
Always.
As always, listeners, if you have any questions, feel free to email me on@standupresources.com. I'm your host, Anna Nassett, and I look forward to sharing more with you in the next few weeks here on the MEND. Be well, be strong, and goodbye. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review or feedback. We love hearing new topic ideas from listeners and watchers as well. Thank you for listening to The MEND, and be well.